This is a report that clearly shows a robust labor market. Doesn't seem to indicate, if you're going by the Somme rule or something along those lines, that a recession is imminent. But it did seem to cause many people on the street yesterday to say the Fed is almost certainly going to have to raise by 75 basis points. You have been deeply opposed to interest rate increases being the sole way to address what's going on in the economy right now. What's your response to that?
Well, here's the good news. The good news is that jobs are being created at a very good rate. We're almost back to where we were in February of 2020 in terms of job numbers. And that's, it's not enough to break out the champagne, but it's still very, very good news. The bad news and the worrying sign here is that the economy is actually slowing in terms of overall output. Consumer confidence is down. And wages, if you consider that wages have purchasing power attached to them, and we still have a lot of inflation, wages are actually dropping as well. Purchasing power is dropping. So there are a lot of signs of some problems ahead. The Fed is likely, given the good jobs report, to feel free to raise interest rates once again, and that's going to make the cost of borrowing much, much higher. And that, in turn, is going to slow the economy even more. That's the big danger ahead, that the Fed inadvertently causes a recession.
So what's your sense? Look, when President Biden and the Biden administration lay out their plan to address inflation that's still running hot at a 40-year high, letting the Fed do what the Fed needs to do is number one, every single time. What should the administration be focusing on instead of just Jerome Powell and the Federal Reserve Board?
Well, first of all, we have got to understand that inflation is now a worldwide phenomenon. It's not just in the United States. It is basically the entire world coming out of a pandemic, and supply routes and supply problems are endemic all around the world. I'm not saying do nothing, but what we can do here is focus on those industries where you have the greatest kind of profit push prices. That is, where you have profits that are so out of line, and we have a lot of industries like that. I mean, oil is the big oil is raking it in. There ought to be some attempt to have a windfall profits tax. That is, you look at the last 5 years, you say, if there are extra profits above what we've had over the last 5 years in this industry, then we're going to tax them away so that the industry doesn't have any incentive to continue to use a kind of price gouging of consumers. And that's what's going on. You see it also in food. Tyson Food, a lot of big food processors are charging a great deal of money. They're making money hand over fist. They should not be imposing that cost on consumers right now.
Can I ask you on the windfall tax idea? There's a proposal on Capitol Hill. There are a number of Democrats on Capitol Hill that are for it. The administration said they're looking at it. They haven't committed one way or the other. But if the issue right now, it seems to be, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but particularly on the refinery side when it comes to oil or to gas prices, the lack or major drop-off in capital investment over the course of the last several years is a huge issue right now. Wouldn't a windfall tax end up setting that back even further or disincentivize them to invest money?
Well, if you look at the data, what you see is that the price of crude oil actually is dropping. In fact, the crude oil prices have dropped, but at the pump, they haven't dropped very much. In fact, around the country, they're still at record price levels. And that means that essentially the oil companies are raking it in. This is a form of profiteering, a form of price gouging. There's not enough competition in this market. The other thing that the administration needs to do is enforce antitrust laws, bust up the monopolies that are cropping up around the country. Now, my point is that there are a lot of things that can and should be done right now other than relying solely on the Federal Reserve Board to raise interest rates and potentially push the economy into a recession.
On the issue of market concentration, I don't want to wander down the kind of intra-party war that's going on related to the debate about concentration and inflation, but I am interested. There was a tweet that you had a couple weeks, and I'm paraphrasing here, I don't have it in front of me, where you said, at this moment, you mentioned windfall tax, DOJ needs to launch an antitrust lawsuit. I believe there's a third point there that you were looking for as well. I mean, that's not, like, the president can't order the Justice Department to file a lawsuit. The president has sent a letter to the FTC and asked them to investigate these types of issues. The FTC is not led by somebody who's a dove when it comes to antitrust issues. Why do you think the administration's agencies, either the Justice Department or FTC, haven't done more on this issue for an administration that did talk a big game when it came to antitrust?
Well, there are two aspects to antitrust. One is the actual prosecution of an antitrust case. That takes some time. The other is the rhetorical aspect of antitrust. That is saying to companies that if you actually don't mend your ways, if you still exercise your monopoly power and raise prices, we are going to focus public attention on you. We're also going to have an antitrust case against you. That rhetorical aspect is very, very important. Companies, they pay a great deal for their brand name. They burnish their brand image. They also don't want antitrust to be used against them. And there has not been that much of that kind of rhetoric from the administration. I think the administration needs to be much tougher with these companies. The other thing that I had suggested, and I think is still very important, is to stop what are called stock buybacks, which are artificial ways of raising stock prices. They used to be considered by the Securities and Exchange Commission to be stock manipulation before the Reagan administration. We ought to go back to that. There's no reason that all of this excess profit ought to be going into buying back shares of stock so that basically shareholders can get the benefit.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. The administration has been so interesting in the sense that the president will sometimes take that rhetorical stance that you're talking about, and then other times kind of move away from it. They haven't necessarily seemed to coalesce behind a single pathway on that front. Before I let you go, though, I do want to ask your thoughts on the latest news with Elon Musk and Twitter. He's now trying to get out of his $44 billion deal to buy the social media platform. You previously warned that Musk buying Twitter was, quote, dangerous and could upend democracy. I believe when you saw the news earlier, you tweeted, finally some good news. Does it surprise you that he's backing out now, given what we've seen over the course of the last several weeks?
Well, it's not very surprising because Elon Musk really he's very impetuous. Let's put it that way. That's kind of a nice way of putting it. He says things and does things without a great deal, it seems, of thought. And Twitter his purchase of Twitter was like that. He now wants to get out of it. Look, in terms of my values and my fears about Elon Musk running a major sort of media center, which is Twitter, that is, I'm relieved that if he gets out of that, I would like him to sort of not take over Twitter. But the law is the law. And under the law, as I understand it, Elon Musk does have an obligation to Twitter, and Twitter has an obligation to its own shareholders to hold Elon Musk to the letter of the law and to his contractual obligation.
Yeah, no, a lot of lawyers are about to make a lot of money and probably already have. Robert Reich.
That's what happens. The lawyers are the ones who are left smiling when all the dust settles.
Always seems to be the case. Robert Reich, I appreciate your time, sir. Thanks as always.